Hi, I'm Rob Shallenberger, and I'm about to have a productive conversation with Mike Vardy.
Welcome to A Productive Conversation. I'm Mike Vardy, and the guest on this episode is Rob Shallenberger. He's the CEO of Becoming Your Best Global Leadership and one of the world's top experts on productivity and time management. His resume is as impressive as it gets. He's flown F-16 in the United States Air Force. He has served as an advanced agent for Air Force One, worked with organizations like the Dallas Cowboys, Charles Schwab, the Israeli Air Force, and even the Rwandan government. Now, in this conversation, we talk about the second edition of the book, Do What Matters Most, specifically how pre-week planning can radically improve your clarity, peace of mind, and performance. And Rob also shares his four-step system, compelling stories from his military and coaching experience, and why the dash between our birth and our death dates is where the real work and reward lies. You're going to walk away from this one with both practical tools and meaningful perspective. So let's get started. Here it is, my conversation, and a productive one at that, with Rob Shallenberger. Rob, thank you so much for taking the time to join me today here on A Productive Conversation.
Absolutely, Mike. Thank you. And thanks to all the listeners that are tuning in today. This is going to be awesome.
So I am holding on to your book here, the second edition of this book, Do What Matters Most, Lead a Life by Design, Not by Default. And for those that have listened to the show before, you all know that I believe productivity is the intersection and the active link between intention and attention. So when I see design and default, that like mirrors that really, really well. What led you to the idea of kind of making sure that people are again avoiding those defaults? My friend Patrick Rohn calls sensible defaults. He talks about these things called sensible defaults, things that make sense to you, but because they're sensible, you have essentially designed them to a degree. So when I see that lead a life by design, not by default, I want to know what that means to you and why that message is important in conjunction with doing what matters most.
Yeah, great question, Mike. So first of all, this is one of three areas of trainings that we do in our company, Becoming Your Best. So Do What Matters Most is a training that we certify other trainers in and train organizations around the world. So to answer your question, part of the research that we've done with thousands of people, we found that 68% of people feel like prioritizing their time is their number one challenge. And what's interesting is 80% of those same people did not have a process to do what matters most. In other words, the two most common approaches to time management were sticky notes and to-do lists.
Mhm.
And so there's this gap, right? A lot of people are figuring out, how do I have more peace in my lives? How do I balance relationships, my health, mental and physical? How do I prioritize what matters most at work? And so really we're the sum of each of our key roles in life. It's not just one role. And so here's a lot of people feel like prioritizing their time is the number one challenge, but without having a way to get there. And so there's a gap. And so what we've done in Do What Matters Most is we've developed a system to help people do what matters most. And so we've given them the tools. We have custom planners, a digital planner for Outlook and Chrome. And the whole point of these tools in this entire program is to give people a framework and a process to schedule their priorities rather than prioritize their schedule. And this is what brings peace into our lives. It helps us balance relationships and juggle all these balls and keep them in the air at the same time and be able to wake up in the morning excited to face the day.
So one of the things I found interesting was your background, right? Flying F-16 fighter jets, serving in the Secret Service, that kind of stuff. Like how did those high stakes experience shape your perspective on leadership and time management? Like, are there lessons there? I mean, as a Green Lantern fan, and again, this is where I nerd out a bit. Hal Jordan was a fighter pilot, so I'm like, he's my favorite Green Lantern. So like that drew me in a bit too. But are there lessons from those days, as in your in your past, that kind of influence some of the principles that you teach?
Oh, absolutely. So just like what we were talking about, flying F-16s for 11 years, we had a mission planning process. So you could take one pilot out and insert another pilot, and they could pick up where, that one left off because we had a process. And so once again, giving people a framework and a process to help them get on top of what matters most was key. Here's one other lesson learned from the fighter pilot days. There's a term that we used in the pilot world called task saturation.
Hmm.
Everybody's experienced this, right? It's when there's so much happening in our brains they can't keep up and process it all. So when we're task saturated as humans, we start to task shed. In other words, we start to drop things out of our cross check. So task saturation oftentimes leads to misprioritization. We unintentionally drop something out of our cross check that we really maybe didn't mean to. Let me give you an example of that, Mike. So
Sure.
we were flying at night.
Hmm.
It was myself and my wingman. And if you ever seen Maverick or Top Gun, you know what busy looks like in the cockpit. So I called for a simple hook turn. Myself and my wingman were 1 mile apart from each other. This should be a simple, low threat, 180-degree turn. So we're basically going the other direction. We should never get closer than a mile apart from each other. Well, we were both task saturated that night. And our number one priority is to always look out the window and know whether, where is our wingman at? Well, that night I said hook left. My wingman heard hook right.
Ooh.
I turned left, he turned right, and neither of us were looking out at the other jet because we were task saturated. We were misprioritizing what mattered most in that moment. And so without realizing it, we crossed within about 50 feet of each other at 1,000 miles per hour closure and almost died that night. And it wasn't until we got back to the debrief to say, wait a second, what happened? Because we couldn't figure it out in the air.
Sure.
And what we found is that saturation that we were experiencing had led to misprioritizing what mattered most. Our number one priority was clearing the flight path, and it caused us almost to die. And so as we step back in our seminars and our trainings and when people read the book, oftentimes just stepping back and doing those things allows us to get into that figurative debrief and say, wait a second, what's going on in our lives? Where are we at today? And that simple act, and then applying the habits talked about and do what matters most, help us really recenter on what matters most and recognize this task saturation when it's occurring.
I want to jump ahead a bit because what you brought up there was really important. There's a piece that I think is worth noting is that you couldn't do it in the moment. Like you were in action, you were in flight, for lack of a better term, and for an accurate term. And so you couldn't do it in the moment. And I find that that when I got to the later chapters in this book, chapter 8, chapter 9, pre-week planning, that if you're in the week, it's the task saturation can take hold, right? Like you can run into these issues. Can you talk a bit about, and people know that I'm a big proponent of, getting in front of things, planning, again, I have a planning day. Sunday is my planning day. I plan both my work and my life stuff. And there's no disruptions, no distractions. No one's calling me on a Sunday. I'm not having any appointments. So can we talk about, you know, the power of pre-week planning? And I mean, again, you can't do these things in the midst of the week. I think that that's a really important thing that people miss is there are moments where you have to course correct, right? Like for certain, but in situations where assessment takes place, it's really difficult to do that midweek. So getting ahead of it, I think, is really important, right?
Yeah. Do you mind if we actually talk about pre-week planning, Mike, if that's all right for a minute?
I absolutely, yeah. Let's go there. Let's go there.
Because you're exactly right on many levels right here. And so if you're listening to this podcast, one of the things that we do in chapter 2 of the book is we have what's called a circle of peace and balance. It's a chance for people to assess where they are in these different key areas of their life. It is a great snapshot of where we are today. And to your point, Mike, oftentimes we don't realize in the moment how task saturated we are until we step back to say, where are we? That circle of peace and balance in the early chapters of the book is designed for exactly that. Pre-week planning is the solution. And for 96% of people, this approach to time management is a completely new approach. Most people are used to saying, well, here, what am I doing in my work role next week? I have these meetings, I have this, I have that, and we put that in our calendar. And while that's good, pre-week planning, as I'm about to describe it, takes it to another level. And you're right, this is what's in chapters 8 and 9 of the book. So let me just walk through the 4 steps to pre-week planning. And like you said, Mike, what we invite people to do is somewhere between Friday afternoon and Sunday afternoon. Notice I didn't say Sunday evening, because for most people, if we wait until Sunday evening, it gets pushed aside by a family event or friends or whatever.
Monday already started on Sunday
Yeah.
evening.
Yeah. So it's sitting down for 20 to 30 minutes, which is 0.03% of our week. And we're planning the other 99.7% of our week. So it's a small investment of time with a huge ROI. What is pre-week planning as we outline it in the book? It's really 4 simple steps, and yet it's powerful. And we were talking before the show started, Mike. One thing that we invite people to do is, regardless of what you've been doing, if you have something that's working, bring that. In other words, hey, if you have some techniques that you feel are really working in your life right now, bring those and incorporate these 4 steps and see how these might add to whatever you're doing. And if you don't have a process right now, consider pre-week planning as I'm about to outline it. So there are 4 steps that we invite people to do. And again, we have a paper planner. You can design your own planner. or use our extensions on Outlook or Google to do this with. So you have the right tools. Step number one is to review your vision, annual goals, and long range calendar. Now, I say vision and annual goals. We invite people to divide their lives into the 5 to 7 roles that matter most to them. Personal being one of those roles. In other words, we've got to take care of ourselves because we can't draw water from an empty well.
Right.
And so, personal. And if you're listening to this, what are the other roles that matter most to you? Maybe parent, maybe spouse, brother, sister, son, daughter, HR director, friend, philanthropist, church member, whatever. So, we invite you to review a vision and the goals that you've come up with in each of those key roles during pre week planning. That means that you're seeing your vision and goals at least once each week, and you're doing what only 2% of people have done. So, that already puts you into a very small statistical group of people. And you can imagine the alignment that might bring into someone's lives looking at their vision and goals that often, especially when it's a vision and goals by role. So powerful. That's step one. Step two is to then write your roles, either in your digital planner or paper planner. So the same roles that you use in vision and goals are the roles we'll use in pre-week planning. Step three is to say, what are the specific action items that I can do this week in each role? Now, we're not building a to-do list. Step three is the brainstorming phase. So I'm not going to do this with you, Mike, because I don't want to hypothesize. I don't ever want to offend anyone here on this. But, if we were to think about what your roles are, the common ones would be father or mother, husband or wife. You have 1 or 2 or 3 professional roles. You're thinking, let's just use husband or father as an example.
Sure.
In our case, Mike, right? We might say, what could I do with my daughter Lana next week? What are the specific things that I could do for Tanya next week in that particular role for me as husband? And so it's a really powerful process in step three to say, what can we do, not what we have to do. What can I do as a husband or a father? And what can I do to take care of myself mentally and physically, emotionally, etc.? And we actually write those action items or type them in, depending on which planner we're using. And step four, and this is why we're not creating a running to-do list, is where we assign a time to each action item
Right.
in our calendar. So we bring each action item and we put it in. And of course, we know that no week is going to go exactly as planned, right? So we're not over-programming. We're not becoming robots. We've got to allow for flexibility. And so our target productivity quotient, meaning the number of items that we plan versus accomplished, is 70 to 80%. Those are the 4 simple steps. Review our vision annual goals, write our roles, what matters most in each role, and then assign a time to it. And then plan for things to come up. I'm not going to accomplish 20 to 30% of what I pre-week plan, and that is okay. Because our research shows that we will still accomplish 800 to 1,000 additional priorities this year using that approach than we would have otherwise, and all with less stress.
And what's great about that is, I mean, we've heard all the adages, the best hitters in baseball only hit the ball 35% of the time, all that stuff. But what's interesting, number one, the filtration aspect of this. And by the way, and anyone who listens to the show knows that I don't go in sequential order in the book. So the book talks about building the vision and looking at roles and goals before we get to this process. But again, you alluded to that, the circle, the kind of assessment that you do in chapter 2 to kind of figure that stuff out. But the other thing that's interesting to me is, again, that filtration aspect is you're filtering it down by roles, and then only then are you making that commitment. Once you've done all that stuff, here's the big one that anyone listening to this, and I come across this with the work I do, I know you do as well, is, that just seems like a lot. That seems like a lot to do in a show. And it's the thing that falls by the wayside, right? Like if we touched on this before we hit record, the David Allen getting things done system. The thing that typically falls apart for people is the weekly review, right? It's those things that just kind of people journaling. I use this as an example too, where I'll say, you should journal. Oh, I don't have time to journal. Yeah, but you have time to go on social media, and journaling does not take that long. So it's that prioritization piece. So what's your pushback when someone says, man, that seems like a lot, or I don't have time to do it, or et cetera, et cetera, et cetera?
Yeah, amen. That's why, Mike, we opened the book, and chapter 1 is focused on a mindset and a skill set. Do what matters most is a completely new skill set for 96% of people that read the book. But it absolutely starts with mindset. And when we're in our seminars, I'll ask, which is more important, mindset or skill set? 99 out of 100 hands will say mindset for that exact reason. How many times in our lives have we had a skill set sitting right in front of us, but we weren't in the right mindset to use it? And, I've done trainings with combat controllers, Navy SEALs. They will start classes of 250 people and they'll finish with 20. And it's not because of anything else. They had a similar starting skill set, but 90% didn't finish because of a mindset. Now, pre-week planning is way easier than being a Navy SEAL. I'm not trying to equate the two.
Sure, sure,
But
sure.
the whole
Yeah,
point is, it takes here's can I just take a couple of minutes to maybe build on this thought, Mike?
yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So I'm gonna say this again, 0.03% of our week is dedicated to pre-week planning. It only takes 20 to 30 minutes to go through those 4 steps we talked about.
Hmm.
It is a habit, and that's why we call them habits in our book, and it's building a habit. And it's important we have grace for ourselves in the process. If we miss a week, oh well, so what? Let's start back up the next week. Let's work on developing the habit. And in the book, we offer tips as to how to develop the habit, different touch points, setting an alarm. We send out a weekly reminder on Sunday for those that would like that, etc. So there's touch points that can help us. But we're taking 20 to 30 minutes to determine what we will do with the other 99% of our week. And at some point, we can either, be humble on our own or be forced or compelled to be humble. In other words, if we're not going to take care of our health and we're going to procrastinate that into our 50s and 60s, at some point, something is going to force us to address our health.
Yeah.
If we don't nurture our relationships consistently and proactively and intentionally, at some point, something will compel us to nurture them and we will face the piper. So it's either now or later.
Right.
And here's the whole point of this. I like to go to cemeteries, and some people think this is a little weird, but I look at headstones.
Yeah.
And there's a birth date and a death date on each headstone. And usually right in between them, there's a dash. There's even a book written about the dash.
Yes.
And I ask myself every time I look at a headstone and I don't know that person, what are their stories? What were the relationships they had in their dash? What did they do with their dash? And it's the culmination of these 3 habits and do what matters most, especially the habit of pre-week planning. It's the one that brings them all together that will help us accomplish 800 to 1,000 additional priorities each year. And when I say priorities, I'm talking about things as simple as a date night, a note to a son or daughter, sitting down one-on-one with one of your team members, getting the tax report done on time, exercise, yoga, meditation, that doctor's appointment, the colonoscopy.
Yeah. 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 Yep.
But these aren't just numbers.
Sure.
When we're talking about, let's say for the next 40 years, a person that consistently will do pre-week planning is accomplishing 30 to 40,000 additional priorities that they would not have done without this holistic habit looking at their different roles.
Yeah.
That's the dash.
Well, and really quickly, what you've done here, and this is, I think, important for people to understand, is you are, and this is important because people get caught up in the quantity, right? And you're illustrating that, which I think is really important. But the efforts, everything that you're talking about, the doing what matters most is the qualitative stuff, spending time with your kids, taking care. So people respond to numbers because they're objective, right? I got to inbox 0. I did this thing. I got 43 things done today, but were they the right 43 things? So the measurement, what this does, and what I appreciate about your work is it doesn't forsake the quantity for the quality, but it certainly doesn't forsake the quality for the quantity.
Yeah, that's exactly it. And you'll read example after example in the book of exactly what you just described. Once people start doing these, they'll come into it saying, well, I don't have more time. Where am I going to get more time in the week? When they start doing pre-week planning, one of the common phrases is, I didn't realize I had time that I didn't even know existed.
Hmm.
And that's what happens when we flip time management to scheduling our priorities rather than prioritizing our schedule. In fact, can I share one story, Mike,
Please.
that really illustrates this qualitative point that you're
Hmm.
talking about? So for our listeners, think about pre-week planning. And if you break down the math, it's really just 20 more priorities in a week. And I'm not talking about rocket science. I'm talking about texting your son or daughter. That takes 30 seconds. It's qualitative, right? Here's an example. The executives of Pepsi were going through the Do What Matters Most training. I wasn't the trainer. One of our other trainers was doing the training. And they did pre-week planning. And one thing that's important about pre-week planning is, I don't know how old you are listening to this, but we can't delegate pre-week planning. We can't delegate it to AI or to an assistant because who else is going to have that role of parent? or spouse or son or daughter or brother or sister. Nobody else can come up with those kind of things that really matter. That's you and I. And
Yep.
so these executives of Pepsi were going through the process of pre-week planning, many of them for their first time ever in this role, doing it themselves. And so one of them came up with the role of father. And in the role of father, he wrote, "Call my son." And the trainer just out of curiosity asked him, "Well, why call your son?" And his response was, "Because I haven't talked with my son in over 7 years." He shared that they had gotten into an argument and they hadn't talked since. So all of a sudden, this call became a big deal. And the trainer asked him, "Well, when are you going to do it? Step three, step four." So he said, "Thursday, 7 o'clock." And this is a pretty dramatic example, but I think it illustrates well, Mike, the point that you're getting at, that it's the qualitative, not just the quantitative. So 6 months later, this trainer had a follow up training with the same team that had gone through the course previously. She saw this gentleman and said there was a palpable difference in his energy. Like the way he showed up, you could see a difference in his countenance. And so she asked him, "What happened with your son? Did you make the call?" And he said, "I saw it on my planner and I realized for 7 years I procrastinated making that call. I'll just do it next week. I'll do it, whenever." And it just doesn't happen. But there it was. And I knew I had to make the call. And so he did. And he went on to share that he started talking with his son and they couldn't even remember what they'd argued about 7 years prior. And now he said, "We've gone on to become best friends and we talk every week." Additionally, there was one more part to the story. He said on that initial call with his son, he found out he had two grandchildren who he didn't even know existed.
Wow.
So he added a role of grandfather. So the question is, what would have happened had he not made that call? For him, pre planning had a generational impact. It was something as simple as sitting down for 7 minutes in that particular training, writing out his role as father and saying, "Call my son," and saying, "I'll do it Thursday at 7 o'clock." Something so simple yet so powerful. And so, yeah, there is a qualitative aspect. We've done the research. We know that a person will accomplish 20 more ish priorities a week than they do without pre planning. As simple as calling your son or writing a thank you note or calling a friend. And that's the qualitative aspect that brings both of these together. And that's why consistently, and I don't want to sound cliche, but the common approach and response is pre-week planning was life changing.
I would imagine that as you get kind of dial this in and it becomes habitual, um, that the way that you go about, I want to stick with pre-week planning because I think it's a really important piece. Um, do you think, so you mentioned the 7 p.m. call, Thursday, 7 p.m. That's when he did it, right? Do you, one thing that I think can happen and people, I mean, again, we're human. So we make these is we'll hyper schedule ourselves. We'll put so many things on our calendar that we won't even after we practice this, right? So even we overestimate what we can do. We don't take into account, we don't leave white space, as Julie Funt says in her book, a minute to think. So I'm wondering, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, is the level of precision in terms of the use of the calendar as you build this habit, does it, I wouldn't say does it change, but does it need to be as precise? So for example, once you've built this as kind of something that you just do, it's who you are. You are a pre-week planner. That's what, so does that 7 o'clock Thursday need to be, or it's like, I'm going to call my son and I'm going to do it Thursday, or I'm going to do it near the end of the week? I'd be curious to see if where the Goldilocks factor is there. Do you know what I mean?
Mhm. And Mike, that is a great question. And this is why I said at the very beginning, if someone else uses different approaches already, like time blocking and then prioritize ABC or, top three priority in the morning, that is all fabulous.
Yeah.
That doesn't
Mhm.
change. That's not replacing. This isn't replacing that. Bring that to pre planning. You can see how simple these 4 steps are, right? We start with our vision and goals. What are our roles? What matters most in each role? Specific action items. And step four is assigning a time to it. Now, that's why I mentioned earlier, and just quickly in passing, the productivity quotient.
Sure.
The target is 70 to 80%. So when we did that research, 20 more priorities in a week, 800 to 1,000 in a year, that is with the target productivity quotient of 70 to 80%. So we already know especially for those that love to check off every box or have that perfectionistic mentality.
Yep.
We're not robots. The expectation is not perfection. We know that life is going to happen. What we call Q1, things are going to pop up during the week. We've got to allow for that flexibility. And it's okay to have a little grace with ourselves and realize, hey, something may not happen at the exact time. So if that Pepsi example, if Thursday at 7 something else came up that he felt was more important that he had to attend, he could have simply moved that to Friday. The
Right.
point is our priorities will still get done, maybe not at the exact time we planned, but it'll still get done. And there is power in step 4, Mike. In other words, taking that list of action items under each role and assigning a time to them significantly increases the likelihood we're going to accomplish them. That's why we're not building a running to-do list. That's why I'm operating off my calendar. And I wish for our listeners' sake, I could pull up my Google Calendar and show you the matrix that I use for pre-week planning that anybody can get at dowhatmattersmostplanner.com. And to address one last thought on your question, Mike,
Hmm.
the productivity quotient is important. And I don't ask people to track this beyond the first 3 or 4 weeks because once you're there, you're there. And a
Right.
normal person will plan about an average of 40-ish actions into their week and accomplish about 33. That's a big contrast from week 1 where they plan about 23 and accomplish 13. And that's because it's normal human progress, right? We're developing a new habit. That first week, we're like, wait, how did this work? By week 4, we have it dialed in. We go through our roles. All right, I'm going to brainstorm that role and we assign a time. If our productivity quotient is like 40%, I'm only accomplishing 40% of what I planned. That tells a story. Either I'm overscheduling, I'm willfully throwing out the window some of the things I planned, which is a whole separate issue.
Hmm.
Nonetheless, a 40 or 50% productivity quotient is telling a story. Am I overprogramming? Am I not leaving enough white space? And likewise, if I'm accomplishing 100% of what I pre planned, hmm, I wonder if there's a little more stretch that could be there potentially. Are we really stretching ourselves to our potential? Is there something else we could do maybe in a different role that we hadn't considered? So those are just a few different thoughts. We call it PQ, productivity quotient. That's why 70, 80% is the target. It's like the healthy balance of stretching and still allowing for life and flexibility.
Well, and I think the other thing too is because and we didn't really touch on this, but I'm gonna hypothesize that when you're pre-week planning, you're looking at your calendar first to see what commitments do I have that are non-negotiable, right? So if you hit 100% on a week that's hectic, you're like, okay, great. This next week isn't hectic. I can maybe stretch, but if there's some standing meetings and appointments, you're like, okay, well, that's great. Like I can. So you have to look at the certainties, I guess, first, and then you get to apply your certainties to the equation. I want to touch on, you touched on this. You briefly mentioned AI. And I think that this is something, especially because this is the second edition of the book. So things have evolved, right? And technology is rapidly moving. As this, we're recording this in March, and this episode is airing months later. By the time you listen to this, but there will be more advances in what AI can do. So there are people that are exploring AI. I have a member of my community, Time Crafting Trust, who is using AI to help with the process of a weekly review. And they're being, obviously, they're being cautious in a way that they aren't necessarily putting personal information in there. They're allowing AI to kind of prompt them through this process. So my question for you is, what do you feel the role of AI is? Maybe not just in the frameworks that you're teaching, but also what people can leverage AI for to help them do this kind of pre-week planning. You know, get into their vision, make sure that they're really dialed into their roles. What are some of the things that AI you feel can assist? And maybe what are some of the things that they should say, okay, well, you mentioned, don't use AI for that. What are because it can be a cautionary tale.
Yeah, it's a great question, Mike. And we'll see how AI evolves, right? I do think there's a place for AI. And we've been working on AI for pre planning and our vision and our goals. And I do think it's helpful for maybe giving us tips, ideas, suggestions, and things like that. But ultimately, and where I have seen this already start going, and I've even seen software out there that's doing it, not in the format we've described here with pre-week planning, but it's saying, hey, let AI plan your week for you. Hmm. No,
Hmm.
big, huge caution red flag on that. Can it be an assistant? Can it give us ideas and suggestions? And we're actually working on a tool that will do that within our digital planner. Yeah, it can absolutely give us suggestions and thoughts. But once again, just like that Pepsi example, there is no way that AI would have said, call my son, knowing the background and the context for his example. There's no way AI is going to know certain things that are going on in our lives. One more example.
Sure.
I was at And this is just to illustrate the point that AI cannot replace us. And I believe one more step, and this is just me personally, I pray before doing pre-read planning. And I view it as a divinely guided process. I really look for inspiration during pre-read planning. And I say, what can I do this week? And while AI may be helpful, it's never going to replace that type of guidance and inspiration. And so here's the example. I was at Lackland Air Force Base. It's a big training base for the Air Force. I was there in early December, and we took a group of what's called combat controllers and pararescue through to what matters most. Now, these are some of the toughest guys and gals in the world. They're the equivalent of Navy SEALs in the Navy, but for the Air Force. If we get shot down in a plane, they're the ones that are going to come and get us in a helicopter. And so, amazing guys. I mean, you're looking at them and you're just like, wow, I don't want to find any of these guys on the street and get on the wrong side of them, and cross them.
Right.
But we're going through this process of vision, goals, and pre planning. And I saw one of the goals that one of these combat controllers had written in the role of husband. And it was after he developed his vision for what he wants to be as a husband. He'd come up with a couple of goals that had to do with date nights and things like that. And under pre planning, he had written, date night with his wife and what they wanted to do. So simple, right? And I asked him, I just said, do you mind if I ask you, why? What's the why behind that in the context? And he quietly whispered to me and he leaned forward and he said, Rob, I don't remember the last time I've been on a date with my wife.
Mm.
I'm like, what? And he said, the truth is, we've hovered on the edge of a divorce now for a couple of years. And it wasn't until sitting down and looking at my vision for that role and the goals that I realized I've been completely neglecting that role as husband. We're like two people living under the same roof, but it's like a plant that hasn't had water for years. And I've realized for the first time that I need to take ownership of this. What is the vision for me as a husband? What can I do and focus on in my goals to nurture our relationship? And it starts this week with pre-week planning. I'm going to organize a date night for my wife and I. Would AI have known the context of that whole situation? And so, although AI can make suggestions, and there is a place for AI, it absolutely cannot replace pre-week planning because of that inspired process of saying, what can I do that matters most in each of our respective roles this week?
Rob, before I let you go, I want to help our listeners. First off, the book is called Do What Matters Most. Lead a life by design, not by default, by you and your dad. But for someone that wants to get started, they've been inspired by this, but maybe a little bit overwhelmed because there's a lot that we got into. And I mean, I encourage people to go back and listen and kind of take notes if they didn't already do that, or, maybe use AI and download the episode and get a summary. That's what you want to do. But what is one small step that they could take today to start doing what matters most?
Yeah, you're right, Mike. And this should not feel overwhelming. In fact, I just finished the Do What Matters Most training last week and asked people at the end what their comments were. And like, so inspired, so refreshing, so powerful. These are the types of words because, once we actually tiptoe into this, it's not overwhelming. It's so powerful. And just to keep this simple, is all we're asking people to do is say, what are your 5 to 7 roles? And let's work together to develop a vision for each one that's inspiring to you. Only 2% of people have done that. Let's come up with 1 to 4 goals this year for each of those key roles that support your vision. And let's work on developing this habit of pre-week planning. That's it. The book will walk you through the how-to. Each chapter is broken up into why and how-to. So here's my 2 invitations, because the reality is this is very simple, Mike, once a person gets into it and just tiptoes in a little bit. Number 1, read or listen to the book. Make sure you're listening to the second edition and not the first edition. So do what matters most, get the second edition and listen to or read it. Along with that, you will see some QR codes in the introduction. You can do this with your own paper. You can grab a piece of paper, that's fine. But what we've learned, the people that consistently develop the habit are the ones that have the tools. So we've designed planners. You can either custom design your planner or get one that we've pre-designed for you, or you can use the extension that you can download and use on Google Calendar or Outlook. The bottom line is if you have the tool, you're more likely to succeed in developing these habits. And it gives you a one-stop shop for all of these. So number 1 is read or listen to the book. Number 2 is if you feel inspired or if you feel like it would be helpful, get the accompanying tool, the planner. And you can do that by scanning the QR code or go to dowhatmattersmostplanner.com and then get the one that you feel is best for you and give it a test. My simple invitation is 4 weeks. Do pre-week planning for 4 weeks, bringing in whatever you do that's already working for you and see if indeed it's life-changing for you. For 96% of people, this is a new approach. And for 98% of people, they say it significantly, positively impacted their lives. So that's the invitation and the starting point, Mike.
Rob, where can people
Mhm.
pick up the book and where can people keep up with the work that you and your team are doing?
Yeah, Amazon's probably easiest. Amazon's quick, fast. Get the Kindle version, the audiobook. So hands down, Amazon's the easiest place to go to get the book. Every other bookstore has it as well, so either one is fine. Becomingyourbest.com is our website. You can follow us on Facebook, all the different places. Uh, but really, my invitation is start with the book. Get it from Amazon, read or listen to it, test these habits for 4 weeks using the accompanying planner, and then see what impact it has in your life. And truly, that's the beginning of leading a life by design rather than living that life by default that we've been talking about the entire show, Mike.
Rob, thanks so much for having a productive conversation with me today.
Thank you, Mike. Awesome.
Thanks to Rob for joining me for this conversation. You can find all of the relevant linked show notes, discussion points, connection points, all of that at mikevardy.com/podcast 617 or wherever you are listening to this podcast right now, your podcast catcher, be it Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Overcast, YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts. You can not only check out the links we discussed and read the show notes, but you can also subscribe to the show. And that way you won't miss a single episode of what's to come. You'll also be able to do things on Spotify like comment and let me know what you think of the show. YouTube, you can do the same thing. Feedback's really important to me and it'll help make the show better. So subscribing to the show, one way to support it, rating and reviewing the show, an even better way to support the show. That's it for this episode. Until next time, I'm Mike Vardy, the host of A Productive Conversation, reminding you to stop doing productive and start being productive. See you later.